For those of you who and I highly recommend grabbing a copy of the presentation. You can follow along that way, and connecting with me on LinkedIn. So often when I go in presentations, I find people are, taking pictures and doing all this other stuff, and I'd rather you focus on this. And I'm trying to get to the meat. If you have a copy of your resume, depending on the time, we might have a little time to actually walk you through some of these things with your resume. So if you have it handy, awesome, do that. What I'm really going to do is talk a little bit about what I'll call the history lessons, my history and kind of the job hunting history. We'll talk a little bit about strategies of AI, how AI is really can help you, but also how it's being used against you, because that's part of the thing of AI. And then I'll talk a little bit about a talent agent, but a little bit more about resources. And I don't have a link in this, but I'll have it by the end of the day, links to really good resources. And then we'll have some Q&A. So let's get started. So in my mind, a lot of our careers, and we run into this an awful lot, where we reach a pivot point in a career where something happens in our space and we have to change. Most of you, if you're looking for jobs, you're thrust into this change, right? You were in something working really well, happy, or maybe not happy, and all of a sudden something changes and now you're faced with decisions that you have to make. My career has started out in semiconductors. That's what brought me to Austin. I'm actually right now in Canada. Right now, I'm outside of Ottawa. The American border is. I'm actually on the water on the St. Lawrence River. I can see America from there, but I'm in Canada. I live in Vancouver. I lived in Austin for 20 something years, and I pivoted from semiconductors into mobile software development. I mean, the list goes on, and I've been obviously around for a while, but I've continually been fortunate in being able to do that. And what you look at this in your career is you want to make sure that you are understanding what's going on in your career path, what's exciting for you, what's working well, what isn't working well, and embrace those changes. You can complain about them, but they don't help you by complaining. You need to be aware of what these changes are and aligning what you do. And one of the things I love about Craig's group and this whole thing about job seekers, which I forget the new name now, but I was job seekers many years ago. And one of the things that emphasizes is that really understanding your passions, your spiritual journey, whatever it is you're going to take, understanding how to meld that in with your career. And that's an important component. We'll talk briefly about that in here. And again, you're also, hopefully, most of us are looking for not just work, which is great, but sometimes meaningful work that makes a difference. And that's a great opportunity for these moments of change. When I first got into technology, was this National Geographic article appeared in 1980 something, and it was introducing this thing called the chip. And I got so excited about it. I was going into university, and I decided to change my major, and I became an electrical engineer, and that started my path, right? I recognized that there was a big moment of change going on, and I was starting a new change. I was starting a new career, and decided to jump into semiconductors, and don't regret it at all, but it's taken me down a lot of interesting path. All of us here are sitting at a crossroads when it comes to AI. And in November of about 2 years ago, right, GPT came out. And not that AI was new, but GPT just changed everything. It brought it into our laps. It brought all of the technology that's needed to make it work well right into your laps in a very cost-effective model. And it's causing a seismic shift in the way we look for jobs, in the way we perform our jobs, in the risk and benefits it has for our jobs. It's changed everything when it comes to the job seeker. So let me talk a little bit about basics, because I always find it's confusing and I don't like getting into really deep technical stuff. So this is the beginning, right? So when we think of AI, we think of it in different contexts. So in the 60s, if you remember Lost in Space, if you're old enough to remember that, I do. I'll pretend I watched it on the reruns, but I didn't. Lost in Space had this robot, and you can interact with the robot and talk, and the robot was the robot. There's a movie called 2001 Space Odyssey, and there's HAL, and HAL was an intelligent thing that controlled the spaceship, And we learned about, basically artificial intelligence in that way. Steven Spielberg came out with a movie, if you know, a couple of years ago, the movie with her, where this gentleman falls in love with basically an Alexa device. Um, and then more recently, the imitation games. And why that one's more important is the real start of AI starts with this guy. This is Alan Turing and his concept of the Turing machine, which is this idea that if you interact this idea of perfect computing, if you have a talking to a computer and talking to a person on the other line of a text interface, can you tell the difference if it's a person or a robot, basically? And the Turing model is the model that computer science has been using for years to define intelligence when it comes to its computing. So there's another history, blah, 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 blah. I won't get into all the details, but there's two things that are important here. One is on November, when AI was always been around, the red line is recognizing how search terms of Google, that indicates interest and curiosity. And for the long time, you'll see a flat line of artificial intelligence going on for the last 5 years. And then when GPT comes up, which is the blue line, you see a giant spike in interest in AI. So it's a huge, huge, huge change. And we're already witnessing it on a day-to-day basis. But as we're now contemplating on our plate, what do we do with this, right? We have to consider AI ethics. I mean, ethics are an important part of technology. How do we use it well and smartly? We have this idea that we're seeing it used all throughout, and this concept of AGI, which is essentially the machines are smarter than us. This is that where they're reaching towards that point. There are different kinds of agents. We'll talk about those. We'll talk about those in a minute. But the idea is that the quest for the technology people, not for us, the quest from the technology people is that the robots are going to get smarter than us. And that's scary because we've seen all the movies. We know how they all end poorly. We're trying to resist that in our careers, but it's an inevitable thing to be thinking about. So the last history slide is really around the basics. So there's a lot of terminology. I'll make it easy because I can pretend to really know all the details, but the machine learning concept is that the machines, the things that we're looking at, are learning. They're learning from internet. They're learning from things. They're taking what they've gotten from us and learning more about how to answer the questions wisely, how to handle that data. Machine learning is a very big science that's been around for a long time. The ability for us to speak to something or type to something, how does that something understand us? That's what they call natural language processing. That's been around for a long time, and it's responding. Where it's become more interesting is we get into these large language models, which are now communicating back to us. And we're starting to see that in GPT. You see that, we see LLMs, how it responds to us. This area in red is the thing that really we'll focus on today, is with generative AI. Generative AI is GPT, and it's taking things and providing more input in it. It's just not listening to you and speaking, but it's actually creating content. It's creating really good text. It's creating images, sometimes really good, sometimes weird. There's a lot of really good innovation going on in here. And the tools, the platforms that will matter that you should be thinking about, not just GPT, Gemini, which is from Google. My favorite is Claude. It's a technical one. It's really good. It's great on technology. The nice thing about Claude is it doesn't hold a lot of your information in. It kind of erases all of that, and it has its benefits in that respect. And then these other tools are more for writing. There's a lot of other tools for graphics and arts and millions of different kinds of tools. We're focusing on resumes. So these are the kinds of tools that will matter to you the most, at least right now. And there's a new concept of agentic coming on board. And agentic AI is really thinking about replacing a task with a robot. Something can be completely self-sufficient and do a task autonomously without any intervention. And these are becoming really, really big. You're going to see more about those this coming year. There's a lot of really interesting companies doing this space, but agentic AI is kind of the new trend we're seeing in AI. Okay, and the challenges with AI, which you should know, but be aware. I went through this great exercise of digesting all these websites and getting all this input and building this giant table. And I didn't realize that the AI tool wasn't reading the website. It just didn't read it, didn't understand the way I was using it. It wasn't reading the website. And it was just giving me data. We call this hallucinations. So you got to be careful that this stuff generates a lot of garbage that you got to be very careful with. It could be biased based on its own world of looking at things. If you're in a corporation, a lot of times your companies don't like you sharing data into this, so you have to worry about data privacy and security. And the again, you'll see a lot of stuff that just sometimes doesn't make any sense. You'll read something, 80% looks good, and there's 20% you're going, what in the heck is going on here? And that's part of the mystique of AI. The legal and ethical questions are significant. I want to disclose that I used AI extensively in the creation of this presentation. That's important for me to tell you. It's my ideas, but I needed a quick way of rendering the slides and getting them done. So there's going to be some weird stuff that comes up I'll discover during the presentation. It's important to make those kind of declarations as you're using AI. And then if you're not familiar, but AI consumes a tremendous amount of energy. And there are companies now, like there's a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania called 3 Mile Island. And I was actually living there at the time, which had a meltdown, and they shut the facility down. Microsoft is now trying to get the facility reopened because its need for power and its proximity to where it needs that power because of AI, right? So it's a very important understanding that it is a huge consumption of resources to be able to do this well. So before I get too much further into this, are there questions about AI that you kind of are curious about, or in your brain that's just messing with your head, or anyone on AI want to at least bring up for discussion before I move to the next step? Go
I
ahead.
have one.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, let me turn on my camera. And I'm all fuzzy, and I
You
apologize
are
about
fuzzy,
that.
but that's okay.
It's strange because I'm here.
There
There
you
it
are.
goes. You like that? There
Yeah.
we go. So I'm fascinated by all of this change with AI. Um, and I have been using it, just the free version of ChatGPT, with caution of updating my or reviewing my resume and or cover letters. Um, and I've been seeing a lot of chatter about this back and forth, like on LinkedIn and such, of whether or not we should be using it when it comes to cover letters and resumes.
Yep.
And I think HR people, they can tell when you're using it. Um, and would you, I don't know, like, I guess my question is like, when and how do we insert the human element into
This is
of
beautiful.
all the data that it's
Right.
gathering? It's I mean, I'm a project manager, but it's just gathering so much data.
Yep.
Um, but I do find it useful because the job hunt is very tedious. It's very, like, every job description is like, they want, want you to eat, breathe, live their job, their company. Um, and it takes a long time just to fill
Yep.
out the applications and the resumes and stuff. So I've been trying to study it and see, okay, well, what can I do? But I don't want it to look like
Yep.
I have
So
these.
that's an excellent question, and this is actually going to be what we'll be talking about throughout. But I'm going to answer at least a couple of key points, Annie, and I think these are
Okay,
important. The first one is AI is a coworker you're collaborating with. Do not rely on that data as your final output. So think
okay,
of this as talking to your mom, right? I talk to my mom all the time, not on job stuff, or I talk to a friend on the job stuff, and they provide me recommendations. They may say, you want to rephrase it, or here's a different format. Those are things that are important. Fundamentally, your resume represents your voice, no one else's,
hmm
right? And if you don't
hmm
like the way
hmm
it comes out, it's not speaking you, don't put it in there. You'll
right.
find a lot of AI generated content has this weird thing as all the words but like the phrasing is not, it doesn't, you don't speak like this, right?
You need
There's
a little
words
bit
you
of
would use. Yeah, right,
like, you need a little
exactly.
bit of grain of salt and a little bit of grammatical
Yep,
context editing.
right. And as we get more into this, you're going to see what the side effects on the job hunting part are, but that's an extremely important thing to recognize. So when we get back into understanding the challenges with it, right? Recognize that all of these things, you just can't take what it's doing and throwing it out there. You have to
Mhm.
validate the stuff. You have to look at it. It has to represent who you are. My opinion is, despite, so we'll walk into the cover. I don't have a thing on cover letters, but we'll talk about cover letters now. So generating cover letters, everyone I've ever spoken to that's in the job hunting space, and I'm almost positive that all of the folks within job seekers would agree, cover letters are rarely read. I mean, rarely are they read. And so you don't want to put a lot of effort into them, but at the same time, you don't want to do something stupid where a robot generates it, you can even look at it, and someone chances looks at it and it crosses you out, right? So that's an important thing.
Okay.
You bet you have a question? You're muted, I think.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have noticed when I've used the AI, that it sometimes deletes some very important details that that I assume is in there. And then I find out later, oh, it's not even in there.
Right.
So it
And
is.
so we'll talk about how some techniques to do it, and there's lots of tools, but be careful with the tools. We'll walk through that as well. One more question. Does anyone have a question before we move to the next step? And you'll have more questions to get into it. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on then. Okay, so the first big benefit and problem, you'll see now that it is super easy and there's some other plugins. We'll talk about those in a moment, but it's super easy to apply for jobs right now. LinkedIn has this thing called Easy Apply. And if you look on LinkedIn and you see this thing and you click a button, you don't do anything. It just says you're in, and you go, yeah, I applied. And if you're going for Texas Workforce Commission, you got one of the 5 things you got to do for the week, and you applied for a job. Yay, right? The reality is, in these kinds of jobs, a lot of people do that, right? And a friend of mine who was recruiting for a job in Vancouver, posted a job, and within just a couple of days had about over 400 people applying for the job. And what he told us was that he could tell a lot of content was generated through AI. And in fact, so much so that the prompts, the ways in which you type make my resume, whatever, right? Some people were actually pasting all of that information, including the resume, into the resume. Like they weren't even looking at it. And he was getting multiple entries and he's overwhelmed with these jobs, and he's now having to use AI to filter all this stuff out. My company actually uses AI as well to how to filter the hundreds or thousands of people applying for jobs. How do you filter through them? This is a little bit more than ATS. You'll probably hear a lot about applicant tracking systems and how they use keyword matching. It's getting a lot more sophisticated, where it's now starting to look at your social media platforms. It knows your LinkedIn profile, it sees your resume, compares the two. Is there a difference? There's a problem here, right? So it's also using AI in a way that's helping the employers look for good candidates. So it's a significant impact, right? The other thing to be thinking about is, this is my guide to the job search, and this is where we get into the holistic way in which we look for jobs. That when we start getting into this, AI is going to touch us in different capacities through this whole process. So my view of how job seeking works starts with a job at Job Seekers. So when I was at Job Seekers years ago, I'm in the lobby, and there's a man in the lobby with his head buried into his hands, slouched over in those little comfy chairs in the church narthex, whatever they call the room outside of the big meeting room. And you can just tell this guy was distraught, and he was looking for work and couldn't find work. And I can tell immediately there's no way he's going to find a job because his head is not screwed on straight, right? He is in a state of mind that he can't look for work. And that's the first step in this. And we'll talk about that. The next challenge with AI, with all these tools, is that can there be ways that the tool can help you understand who you are? What are your talents? What are the things you're good at? How do you amplify those? How do you stand out? We're so focused on writing in the resume, we forget the content of the resume, what we wanted to say about us. We're so worried about matching to the job description, we're still forgetting to tell our story. And we need to know what our story is. And we're not going to focus on a lot of that here, but that's an important part of it. There's an analogy that I took out of the deck, but you need to understand the analogy about the hockey stick. That's a hockey stick with a puck. I'm in Canada, so that's a good analogy for people. But there's this famous player named Wayne Gretzky, and he's like one of the best players of hockey of all time. And they asked him, what is your secret? He says, I don't skate to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck is going. And that's the idea in your career. I don't know where AI is now. I know where my career is right now, but I have to skate or practice or get ready where I believe it's going and prepare that way. And so we need to understand how that's going to work. And we not know exactly, but we have to make intelligent guesses of where we think our jobs are going. Will they be replaced by AI? Will it be safe? What are the new technologies or new things that are in my world that I care about that are growing? And so be aware of that. Then the target of the job search, which are the kind of the skills that you need to do. But the most important thing that you still have to do is network, network, network. No matter how great this technology is, no matter how wonderful you're on these tools, your job is going to be found primarily going to be through network and personal connections. And that's something you can't ignore. And if you can spend if you spend $10 on all of these, spend $1 on each one of these and everything on networking, what's left over. So that's how important networking is. It's probably the most significant thing. And AI won't replace that. It might give you some suggestions. You might find some interesting things. It might help you with your elevator pitch. It might help you with a number of areas, but you need to make sure you are constantly networking along the way. So when we get into the details, where can AI help you? AI, and for those of you who just joined, the presentation link is going to be, it's already included in the deck, and we'll see it a little bit later. But part of the
Nick,
AI.
can you zoom out just a, can you zoom your screen out just a little bit?
Zoom it out.
I think it like got zoomed in. Is everyone else okay? It might just be me.
Let me do this.
I think it might just be you.
Yeah, I see it fine.
Okay.
It's zoomed out on ours.
And I think you can zoom. I think depending on your thing, I think you can, depending on your device, you might be able to pinch it in or out because you can zoom the screen itself.
You're good. Carry on.
Okay. Let me share 1, 2 slideshow. Okay. And again, for networking, I don't know how much AI is going to help you with the networking, but just, that's the most important component. So one of the things you'll talk about are prompts. You'll hear about that a lot. And if you're using GPT, what you're effectively doing is talking to what I'll call the robot, and you ask it questions. And the challenge with it is that it doesn't understand the context sometimes, or it's grabbing context that may not be the context you're looking for, and it gives you weird answers back. And so what you want to make sure is that when you're creating a prompt, a way you're going to talk to these, and we're going to give some examples in a minute, but if you're talking to one of these tools, you want to make sure that it understands it before it starts executing too much. And there's some ways you can go off and do that. The idea is you want to create a very clear context. You can be very specific with what you're looking for. And you're going to find ways, and people use little tactics or little clever tools they use that they hope gives them better results. And remember that the results are not necessarily guaranteed to be correct. The newer tools are starting to show and cite references, but a lot of them are citing references of websites that aren't official websites. I mean, it's a website, it's got good data, but who knows how good that data is. So just be aware that their validation is an important part. It's on your lap, right? You have to make sure you understand that. So the link to this article is actually worthwhile. I have it linked in here. It's from the Sloan School, and it was rather useful to get going. So what I did in our mock example, and this is where we're going to walk you through this in a minute, if you have your resume handy, is you provide like a narrative, and you try to help the robot understand what you're trying to do. And so what I normally do is I provide this thing called context, and I actually use the frame context in uppercase. That way, anytime I want to reference it, I know how to cross-reference things. So I'm very careful with how I use terms. Resume is a term. A cover letter is a term. A job description is a term. So when you're cutting and pasting things, you don't change the description of it and confuse the robot. Not that it will get confused, but you do want to make sure it's very clear. So this context is usually I describe what I'm trying to get done, right? you're a person. I usually start, I'm a product manager that wants this, or I'm a whatever that does this, right? You describe the thing that you're trying to do. You're talking to someone. You either talk to it as doing all the work, or you're saying, I need your help. In this case, it's written that way. You are this person, I am this person, and I need some kind of help. And what kind of tone do you want from this? Do you want it informative? Do you want it formal? Do you want, what is the thing you want back from it? And tone is a good way. It's a term that's used a lot in here. And then the task is specific, and try to be specific in something small. And if you're using the command line tools like GPT, remember that as you ask the one question, you can ask follow-up. So you're building more and more context, and the answers get better as you build through it. If you're going to paste information in, they're getting much better at being able to paste good information, like your resume or a job description. Those are really nice to be able to post in. And my magic thing I do all the time is I ask this question: do you have any questions before we get started? And it's amazing asking that question. As much as you may think you've done it, it's nice because it may have questions, right? And the robot might come back and ask you, well, are you trying to move up in the role? The kinds of things they're going to be asking for. And we're going to experiment with 2 tools just to kind of get a comparison of how different the results are for each. But that's what we'll call a prompt. So here's an example. You, robot, are an expert career coach who will be reviewing my resume, providing me recommendations. I'm a data scientist. It's a made-up role. I'm not a data scientist. And I want to work at a leadership level, and I work in it's a very competitive space. I want to stand out. Here's the tone. The task: I'm going to ask you to review my resume. So the first step I normally want the robot to do is look at my resume and tell me what it says about me. Just literally, that's what I want it to do. I'm not going to necessarily ask for a lot of changes. Sometimes I do. In this case, I do. I paste it in and I ask for questions. Has anyone done this before? Has anyone not done this? Annie, talk about your experience. And then Yvette, your second, because I see your pictures. So what's your experience?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, I did put, I asked ChatGPT for help in reviewing my resume. And I specifically said, I want to edit myself, because I didn't want it to go in and like take control over the whole thing and have it be weird. So it gently provided suggestions of change. It also provided, which I found helpful, I asked for a summary, and I asked for a summary of like, okay, well, here's all the LinkedIn references that I have that people have said about me. Can you summarize it for me and into pretty little bullet points? And I've actually included that in part of my cover letter, but nobody really thoroughly reads those anyway. But I did it just in case. And I put it in bullet points that are easy to read so that they can see, if my colleagues summarize this about me, here's about me. So I put that in my cover letter. AI is very fascinating. It's helpful, but it's also like I'm definitely more cautious with it. And I mean, it's a giant learning machine. I think of it as a giant database. But this is very helpful for your example here, because I have been writing it as more. I try to be as a project manager. I try to write use cases, and I try to be as detailed as possible with the chat GPT, and providing like, don't make assumptions, don't like, be more factual, put it in bullet points, those sort of guidelines.
Okay. Yvette?
Very fascinating for me.
I haven't used it to the extent that Annie has, and I'm gonna go with that strategy next. I've been using there's a platform called Earn Better, and they take it was presented in the launchpad, and they take your resume and then they craft it to whatever you're applying to. And so it's more focused on that, but I like the specific use cases, and I'm going to work with that next as my next education.
Bill?
I'm new here. Hi. I mean, I've used Claude for my resume, and one of the things that drives me crazy about it is that it loves comma splices. And as a technical writer, it drives me crazy. And there are times I tell it, hey, write it normal, get out the comma splices so it represents me in a positive light. But I actually have really started to rely a lot on Claude to adapt my resume. And I think everybody should just, when they use it, just read it again
Yeah.
and see if it still represents you. I use it also for my cover letters, but I don't, and I find that, yeah, it does a good job, but it stretches the truth a little bit too much for me. And so while I'll use it, I go back and rewrite it. So I never take it and then just copy and paste it in. It's just one of those things. It's a tool, and I find it is very helpful. But then
Yep.
just make sure you go back and read it and change it to so it really does sound like you. But it's a start.
Yep. Is my screen still shared? Do you still see my screen?
It looks
Okay,
good.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's really a good point, because here's the thing with these. So each of these tools do something really well. Claude is a great technical tool, unbelievable technical tool. It's great on code. It's great. You can output a lot of the stuff into what they call markdown languages, put in the documents. I can create diagrams. I wrote a request for proposal and I did it on Claude. It was incredible, right? But it doesn't do other things really well. And so I use Grammarly, because I've been using that for a long time, and Grammarly is out there, and it actually speaks people. Like, it's not like this robot stuff. It's good at getting the text down. So what I'll do, and Bill, you might want to consider this, is once you get it done in one format, use Grammarly or something else to do that's better on the writing. And in the earlier presentation, there are some ones that are good at copy and editing. I don't know how good the tools are. I can't rate them, but we see this a lot in these tools. They don't really speak who we are. Right. And so just be aware that that's out there. And again, think of it as a coworker. So how are we on time? I think, how are we on time?
You're good. You're fine.
How much more time?
About 15 minutes.
Okay.
15 to 30.
So I'm going to do this super quick, and you maybe get kind of dizzy, but I just want to show you what this would look like as we're doing this. So again, we've given this context, and I'm going to copy this. Oh, I can't copy this. I have to exit out. Copy this. Where did you go? Okay. So we have now Gemini. Everyone has Gemini. Gemini is Google. Gemini.google.com. If you have a Gmail account, you got Gemini. And it's free. And again, when the way these services work often is the more usage you get, that's when money starts kicking in. So if you're the kinds of stuff you're doing for resumes, small stuff, it's usually not a problem. I don't know if Bill's a techie, but you start getting into coding and you got gigantic data sets you're dealing with and you start really hammering on it, then you got to pay. And there's different levels of paying. So I pay 20 bucks for Claude and I don't pay anything for Gemini. We're going to do the exact same thing in both. I'm going to paste in the prompts on both. Remember that my resume is at the bottom. So my resume is below. And I'll do the same thing here. And I have a fake resume here. 1 second, I'll move you out of the way. Mike Michaels, I like that name. Copy. And what we'll do is we'll paste resume there. And we'll go over here to Claude and we'll paste the resume here. And you've seen these before, so this isn't real rocket science. But what it's doing in this particular case is it's giving you a lot of really good feedback. And what I like about them is one of the things with our resumes, especially the first round, is we don't write the impact statements the way we should. There's questions in here, so I'll go through some of the kinds of questions we want to look at. But it's really going through all this stuff and trying to find ways in which, hey, you're a data scientist and this should be something it's not in your resume. Should we add it in, right? That's the kind of dialogue you want to have with it at this point. Don't don't think of this as rewriting it. Think of this as giving you content. Rewriting is actually quite easy, but if you like the format that you're using, use that format as a template. We'll talk about that concept in a minute. But what you're looking for is really trying to understand what this resume is saying about you, feedback, basic level feedback. That's the basic, what you're looking for. The things that you want to start emphasizing more in this, which is, I think, much more important, are these sets of other questions. So what improvements do you have? Do you have feedback on the certain skills? There's maybe, should I put something else in here? Like, you're asking the kinds of questions of looking for the gaps. What are some of the gaps that within your profession? When you get into the job hunt, it's something different. But think about different ways of writing your summary, different ways of structuring it. The nice thing the nice thing about this is you can format it very quickly. Once it has content and you have a set of content that you like, what one of the people I spoke to suggested that you write something that's got a lot of content of everything you've ever done, and then condense it down based on the job you're going after. I don't pros and cons with that, but that's one of the ideas with that. But the prompts will help you really just spend time looking at it and figuring out what you like and what you don't like. And that's going to be an important component here, is helping it understand these basic questions. So as you're going through this, what are my skills? Ask it. Hey, I'm in this space. What do you think the impact of AI is going to have my job down the road? Knowing that this is where it's going, what do you recommend for tools? What do you recommend for things I can do to fill in that gap, right? You're looking for different ways of figuring out who you are and where you're going. That's what the purpose of these questions are. The next one, we're not going to get into this one, but this is going to be the next thing to think about, round 2. We won't go the example here, but we'll just talk about it. Is where did it go? Round 2. This is now where you are either providing a resume and comparing it to your job description, right? So and also maybe a style guide. So the reason why I mentioned style guide is we talk about, I've seen a lot of resumes. We're mentoring a bunch of people at my company, and the resume formatting sucks on a lot of people, right? And the first thing I'd recommend is, after they get all the information down, find a style that they like and apply that style to what they're doing. So what I did in my example, I don't have an example here because of time, but I have a style guide. I like, this one's not bad. This is from Harvard Business Review, or Harvard whatever. I would move the education down, but this is a simple model that we believe is ATS compliant. I can't test for that, but it's a nice format. It's super easy to read, and you just keep this a generic style. And the other one is another template very similar to that. There's a professional and a student level version, but you find a style that you think is good. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Job Seekers has a fairly elaborate resume review process, and they probably have a style. I don't know if it's changed since I've been there, but that, if you're comfortable with that style, use that one as well. And what you're doing is you're asking AI to assist you in, again, you're doing this the same thing. It knows who you are, it knows your history, it knows all the things about you. And now you're coming in and saying, okay, now that you've got all this stuff, I want a general purpose resume, and use this style, and blah, 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 right? So that's another way of doing it. You can also compare resumes and say, here's my resume, and here's a job description. Tell me what a good match is, right? So there's a lot of different things. Now, a lot of these tools that we're all talking about are built on top of these things, built on top of GPT, or on top of Claude or Gemini, or Microsoft's Copilot, right? They're built on these platforms. So many of the kinds of things you're doing are kind of being performed in these tools, but you kind of feel you have a little bit tighter control over what's going on. So I like it this way a little bit more. The other ones, you just sort of magically do stuff and you're not sure how to fiddle with it. That's my personal opinion. Questions on this so far? I got one more thing to cover, but any questions up to this point? good. All right. So let me walk you through another thing to be thinking about, right? So there are a number of tools out there that are built around the job seeking sites that have a lot of AI built into them. Teal is one of them, and Simplify is another. There's a bunch of others, but those are the two big ones. And the other one is Hunter, Huntr. And Hunter is let me see if I can find, well, we'll dig them up in a minute. In the deck that you'll be getting, I'll add the links to those other places, but the concept is this. When you come onto a job site, you have created an account with this company called Teal as an example. And Teal has my resume, has everything about me. It knows who I am, and asks a bunch of questions about the kinds of companies I'm looking for and whatever. And it asks that onboarding space. And when I come onto a site like this, the extension, I've added an extension in Google Chrome, and it can then interact with me, and it's grabbing information out of this, it's determining the match. I have a feeling this, I'll have to dig up my other account because this one probably doesn't have my profile, but it starts building up this information in this space. It can automatically apply to certain websites. So if these are on Bamboo or on Lever, the job sites, I can literally just push a button and it'll fill in all the forms for me. It'll pop my resume in. The caution I want to say is I would avoid having it automatically generate resumes for you, and I would avoid having it automatically generating cover letters for you. You want to have that process on your lap. You want to understand it. You want it to represent your voice. You don't want the robot doing it because you're just going to get lazy and start throwing a bunch of stuff out there. So be mindful about using the tool. Most of these tools also allow you to track your progress. And so that's an important part of that as well. Tracking your progress is important. You know, I submitted these jobs are at this stage, and there's some really good tools. Hunter is very good at that. Teal has a tool for that as well. So those are good resources, and there's a lot of AI built into it, but try to take the AI into your lap and use it as best as you can to get your voice out there. And then I just got to plug our company once, just because I'm here. What our tool does, TalentGenius, you give it a resume or your LinkedIn profile. We do a bunch of stuff. We're making a lot of improvements to the site, so I would normally give this as a demo, but I'm not going to fuss with it now. But there's two things I like about it, and there's a lot of things about it we can do a lot better. So these other sites are much better for the kinds of things we just talked about. Where our tool is really good is it does two things. One is looking at your skill set, and it's trying to put them in categories. You know, I got a great, mobile development background. Guess what? That's not important anymore. That's not a big thing anymore. These other tools are more important. If I'm doing mobile development, but it has a strong cloud computing on a cloud computing platform, I need to emphasize that over something else. If I have content management systems, which I think are really awesome, yay, there may be something in that middle category that might be more applicable to certain kinds of jobs. So it does a nice job at understanding that. And it also helps you understand a little bit about your job and how much AI is going to impact your job. It doesn't mean the high number is bad. It just means you better have AI on your resume. You better understand how it's going to impact your jobs, and just be aware of that. With that said, I think that is the resume templates. Did my thing. Did that. Okay. So questions. You don't have to have questions, but questions are good, because part of this is that let's go for someone who has never used. Jeff, you go first. You put your hand up, and then I'll pick on someone. Go ahead, Jeff.
Sure. So in regards to AI usage overall, like what little I've handled in that has mostly just been using a few tools like JobScan and Teal. Teal you mentioned earlier in regards to that. The problem I've been running into is that like several places I'm applying to, especially if I've got like a resume that's on there, tends to be like, oh, your resume matches only 40s, 50s, some odd, some insert low number percentage of like matching this thing or whatever, that kind of thing. And like it's been difficult, if not impossible, to get that number any higher, right?
Yep.
How realistically, like, how important is it really for like the whole like, oh, your resume is like this good match or whatever? Like, how often like do those resumes that actually hit that 75%, 80%, whatever that metric is, right? Are recruiters really like going to see an actual like 9 day difference between like resumes for some job that has like a 75%, 80% match from like places like Teal as opposed to something that's like 40, 50 or something like that?
So I don't know the answer, but let me tell you, I'll give you what I think is happening, right? So I've used so for those of you not familiar with JobScan, a JobScan was actually been around for a while. And before we knew all these AI tools, what JobScan would do is it reads in your resume, compares the job description, and it does a keyword match. And if I say product management 10 times and I have it one time on my if product management is in the resume 10 times and it's only once in my resume, then that does not a great match. They do this, it's a complicated, it's called a linear cosine match, but it's basically matching words and how close you are aligned to the key words. And what we do as monkeys is we say, oh, we have to go back and change all these words to match the exact case tense, the whole bit. And you will spend a tremendous amount of time trying to get your resume matched up to an 80, 90% level. And guess what? It still doesn't get accepted. Like it's that kind of thing. What I recommend is think of this in a different way, right? So you've got probably a number of companies you could apply for. There's probably 10 that matter to you the most. And hopefully if you don't have it, you need to develop that 10. And your strategy is now trying to figure out how do I break into those 10 places? What's the smartest way of doing it? The resume job application process is important, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the first or final step. You can apply, get rejected. It doesn't mean you're really rejected. You got rejected out of the HR people. You got to learn how to map yourself into that. So here's an example. So I was working with this company, actually they're out of Austin, and you hire these what we'll call agents, but you can do this on your own. And you literally are connecting to people that are similar in your space on LinkedIn. You find a way to either you have a second level connection to introduce you, or you just cold call and you just try to link into these places. You'll find people are in 3 different categories. There'll be a person that's helpful, yay. A person that'll ignore you, which is yay, because that means you just don't need to worry about them anymore. And there's another person you got to be careful with, which seems like they're going to help you, but they're going to suck a lot of time out of you because they're going to delay and pivot and not do things, right? You just want to focus on the people that are going to help you. And you find techniques to be able to find ways to get through that first level. Most of the jobs, especially in Austin, it's a very tight community, are probably going to get hired by people they know or people that have that insight. So you need to figure out how to bridge that gap. What I found when I was using JobScan was I was spending a lot of time doing resumes. It was taking me away from doing the important things. So for the important jobs, use JobScan or something like it. Recognize that every search engine uses a different algorithm on how it does its matching. And now they're probably going to use more AI kind of stuff where they're looking for more than just the keyword matching. So you can go crazy trying to get to defeat the robots. But if you're a really good fit for that job and you know you're a good fit for that job and you feel you've done the resume that makes that fit, start finding other ways of connecting in with them. Okay?
Got it.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Someone who has never touched AI, tell me about your apprehensions with AI. And I'll pick on you if you don't say anything because I'm evil and mean.
I'll definitely step in front of that bus there.
Okay.
Yeah, especially in regards to software and web development type stuff, the concern on my end is that with me just now kind of getting into this field, having gone to boot camp late 2023, right, and only just landing an internship like that just wrapped up a few months ago. Which is the only tangible experience I've currently got at the moment. That I stepped into this field way too late when AI is kind of at a point where like, oh, it can write code for people and such, and they're using AI to effectively replace, jobs and such. And that is a major concern on my end, because I'm just like, I just got into this field. I don't want to have to not only compete against like other people who are also trying to break in, but at the same time, like also have to compete against like the robots who can write code, you know,
Yep.
that and like not need people like me, which is a major concern on my end and has always been, which is generally why I've been super anti AI just in general. So,
but it's there, right? And we
yeah.
can't ignore it, right? So Jeff brings up an excellent point, which is our jobs will be impacted in some way, shape, or form, right? And some jobs, it may be in hospitality. Well, actually, it doesn't matter what job. It's all over the place. So what we're seeing right now in the agentic space, meaning in the ways of creating these autonomous things, is they're starting to look at replacing more in the sales space, right? Cold calling, first level. You're starting to see these in interviews as well, that you're actually you're being interviewed by a robot. You interact with something and there's a robot you're actually communicating with as far as your interview. I just saw a company about this yesterday. So we'll see this more and more. So in Jeff's case of doing web development, so he has to recognize that there is a part of the job that is the main, I can build up a website pretty quickly through one of these tools, but my specialty is blank, right? And I'm good at this that the robot's not going to be able to do easily. Some of the basic graphics are being done by the robot. So, again, looking through the AI, looking at research, look at ways to actually even ask AI where they think that this particular job is going to go down the road to get a better feel for it. And then you have to plan accordingly. Talk to people in your field to see what tools that they're using, what they see happening. But what we're seeing now and what we believe will happen, not now, but maybe a couple of years from now, especially like a web developer like Jeff, is that Jeff can come in and say, listen, I'm a one person company, but I got an entire team working for me because I have all these agents underneath me, right? I have an agent that does the web design. I got a back end thing that does whatever. And I've got all these little things that these little robots are doing. And I'm orchestrating all of that and doing the customer interface and building a website and experience for users. So that's a possibility. It sounds science fiction-y, but it's not that far away. But thank you for that question, Jeff. Jackie, we have time for one or two more questions?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been so good, Mike. Thank you. I think it's such a benefit to job seekers for y'all, like to be able to articulate, even in interviews, how you use AI and just to show that expertise. It's not something to be afraid of. It's like you said, Fisher, we've opened up the Pandora box for AI. We can't go back. So it's like, let's learn how to use it. Let's utilize it. Let's
learn how to use it, understand the things that are relevant in your field. Absolutely. And also learn how to bring it up and make sure it shows up in your resume, but more than just that you use them, because GPT is sort of like, I use Google to search for things, right? I mean, it's so basic right now. It's how do you really use it? Where is it saving time? Projects you've worked on it, metrics that help drive that. Since I've used it, my productivity's gone up by a certain percentage. Things of that nature, of just really understanding the novel ways that you're using it, because I think it's really important. And in the job seeking space, you see it all over the space. I mean, you're hitting it on every aspect of the job seeking is going to be touched by AI in some way. What else we got here?
Any other questions? We can get real comfortable sitting in the silence. So
I just want to say thank you, Mike. This is very fascinating. But you also just made me think about adding something onto my resume for Chat GPT, but it was for one of my previous employments, but we used it internally on the business. It was highly secure. We had to be very cautious about what documents we were uploading and such. But I do have experience with that on the business side. So I'm adding it to my resume.
Yeah. And these are important. These are just like skills with everything else. And it's like everything you do, right? You need a way to emphasize or demonstrate that you have a good knowledge of it, as opposed to you just added a bunch of keywords on your resume, right? They want to see examples, right?
Right.
So in the past, I was coached to put all the hashtags or keywords, skills, or whatever it is in your resume, so it shows up in the ATS thing. But the reality is they're smart and they recognize these words just are words. They don't, they're not in the
Mhm.
context of stuff that you've done. And again,
Mhm.
talk to AI on giving us suggestions on how to phrase things. Don't be afraid of talking to it, because it's amazing. The more you put into it, the content comes out sometimes just absolutely incredible. And sometimes it's better just to start over, go, this is not going anywhere, open up a new chat, switch to another tool. And if you're not getting anywhere on grammar on Gemini, jump into GPT or some other tool. Okay, anything else? Okay, so you should have access to the presentation. One last shot at that. I'll just put these in the Slack. I mean in the chat. Presentation is here to everybody. That's the presentation, and this is my LinkedIn.
Beautiful. Thank you again, Mike. Thank you so much. Hopefully we'll have you back. You can do a full demo sometime.
Well, I'm heading to Austin in April. And I got family still there. So, I mean, I still have a lot of reason to go to Austin, but just not hard plans yet, but yeah, it'd be fun to, where do you guys meet?
We're in North Austin. So
Okay,
we
you're
have
at
a
the
partner
big,
in South.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
So
you're at the big, you're Craig's church, right? Up in North. Okay, yeah.
correct. Yep.
Nope. Know that
Lakeland.
place really well. Know that place real well.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, everyone. Have a great oh, it's Monday. Have a great Monday.